Hi students, welcome to week 8, our final week together in production operations management. Let's dive right into it. Learning objectives for this week. We're looking at something you maybe never even studied before called theory of constraints. It's by a guy named Eli Goldratt. We'll look at that in a minute. We're going to look at the theory of constraints and compare it to other conventional approaches like Lean and Six Sigma and that sort of thing. Your book covers this a lot, so make sure you check out the chapter on this. Understanding healthcare. Healthcare is a lot different than the other industries that we've been looking at. So we're going to spend just a few minutes on that. And then also in your text, it covers some future trends in healthcare that are important to know. Especially if you're in the healthcare industry, you may want to pay particularly close attention to this. Eli Goldratt developed what's called the theory of constraints. And he said the goal of the firm, quite simply, is to make money. Everything else is subjective to that. The goal of the firm is to make money. There's all kinds of good reasons that should be the goal because it keeps people employed, keeps the company moving forward and taking care of its 3 bottom lines. It's good for the community prosperity. So the goal of the firm is to make money. So inside the concept of the theory of constraints is this idea of performance measurements. And they're financial measurements. Remember, the goal is to make money. So we look at net profit, we look at return on investment, or ROI, and we look at cash flow. Those are the 3 measurements of financial success for a company in the Goldratt theory of constraint concept. In his theory of constraints, he also says, hey, listen, there's some performance measurements that you have to balance. You have to optimize these. There's throughput, and we looked at throughput a few chapters ago. It's the rate at which money, we looked at it for product, now it's about money, the rate at which money is generated by the system through sales. Remember, it's all about making money. Inventory, you have to look at the money that's tied up with material on your floor, material in your office. It's money invested to make things that you intend to sell later on, but while it's inventory, it's not doing anything for you. And then there's the operating expense, which is the money it takes to convert the inventory into sellable material. It's what it takes for you to spend or to turn that inventory into throughput. Goldratt's theory of constraint is this: you identify the system constraint. Think about a process from A to Z, whatever, how many steps are in there. Think about that process. You identify the system constraint, like where's the bottleneck, where's the choke point, and you decide how to make that system constraint as effective as you can. You figure out how to reduce that particular process. Maybe it's process number or process letter D is the constraint. And you want to figure out how to not make that the constraint, how to not make that the bottleneck anymore. And then every other part of the system needs to, is subordinate to that particular decision. So if process letter D or box D is the constraint, everything else is subordinate to making sure that D is not the constraint. And then you do this thing called elevating the system constraints. You do this by if you've done everything you can to the process to make it not the constraint, but it's still not generating the output, then you have to pour more input into it. Elevating the system constraint by pouring more input into that constraint process to get the output that you need. Then once you've done this for a particular process that's a constraint, step 5 is you start over and you pick a different part of the process that's now the constraint. You just keep working this process over and over. When it says don't let the inertia become the system constraint, what that means, what Goldratt means, is that don't get so tied up with over fixing a process to not make it the constraint. So sometimes the inertia of a good idea just keeps us focused and hyper focused, if you will, on eliminating problems at one process, step of the process. Once that's not the constraint, move on to something else. Okay, Goldratt's rule of production scheduling. There's a number of them here. We're not going to hit them all. I'm just going to show them to you. This is not about capacity. You're not balancing capacity in the process. You're balancing the flow. You want to get throughput going through your process. This is not about making sure each step has equal capacity. It's all about flow. The level of utilization of a non-bottleneck resource is not determined by its own potential, but by some other constraint in the system. So there are bottlenecks and there are non-bottlenecked parts of the process. The non-bottlenecked ones, they really don't have any control of themselves. They're actually being constrained by something upstream or downstream from it. A utilization and activation of a resource are not the same. Be sure to read about this in your text. It's probably on the quiz. An hour lost at a bottleneck is an hour lost for the entire system. If you have a bottleneck or a choke point in your system, an hour lost at that process is an hour lost for the whole system. But here's the corollary. You save an hour at a non-bottleneck, it's just a mirage. It's pretend, it's just making you feel good. So if you have something that's not a bottleneck and you find a way to make it more efficient, you're wasting your time. Focus on the bottleneck, focus on the constraint. And then here are some of the other rules as well. We're not going to go through those real. You can read about those later on. All right, let's switch over to talk about hospitals for a moment. This is out of chapter 24, I think. Real quick, you can see like there's different typographies. This is typography of different hospital frameworks. So there's general hospital emergency room, all the way down to the rehab hospital. Think about the Shouldice hip replacement. That knee and hip replacement, I think is what it was. Exercise we did way back week 1 or 2. That's an example of a rehab all the way back to like a hospital that's in your community. So the complexity of operations are pretty low at a rehab because the steps are pretty complex, okay? But there's not a wide variety of operations that have to take place. They're pretty narrow. They're focused on that one thing. Whereas in an emergency room, they have a lot of different things that they have to cover. You know, everything from broken legs, gunshots, people choking, bee stings, whatever the case might be. So quite a wide range. And in that, the range of products offered, pretty narrow here. At a rehab, you're in there to get one thing done, and then you're in and you're out. Whereas at a hospital, quite a wide range of things that have to go on. You can be there for short term or long term. The nature of healthcare operations really is quite a bit different than other services or other industries that we've been talking about. So design, management, and improvement of the system is really what we're about when we talk about healthcare operations. And it's about delivering healthcare services. Services like, that involve close, intimate customer contact, a wide variety of providers. Think about your hospital, your community hospital. You have doctors, you have suppliers, you have what's called the care chain involved with taking everybody bringing their services into the hospital. Ambulances and EMTs and everything else. There's life or death outcomes as a result of those services. So hospitals is a big focus in the healthcare industry because there's so much money and so much labor tied up in taking care of sometimes just a single person. The differences between hospital operations and service and manufacturing are quite profound. For example, key operators in a hospital, they also deliver the service, and like doctors and that sort of thing. And the point I want to make is that these are like trained professionals. And when you think about a hospital, the core of the business, you think about the Parson-Thompson model we studied a little while ago, the core of the business really is the doctors and the nurses, highly skilled people. The relationship between price and performance isn't direct. Sometimes you feel like you overpay for the hospital. Not all the time. Sometimes you're not even seeing half the bill of what it really costs. There's no single line of command. There's really this balance of power between doctors and administration and nurses and unions and that sort of thing. The product specifications are subjective and they're vague. And hospital operations is really not a commodity, of course, that can be stocked up. There's scheduling issues. It's inherently inefficient to run an ER room. It just is, because you're all about triage and taking care of what's in front of you right at the moment. Not always about efficiency. And elective procedures, though, can be scheduled so that those are oftentimes more efficient. But in the emergency room, general hospital care, not always very efficient. Capacity planning is always big. Think about the Shouldice example that we had. Remember, there's some simple calculations we had to do, and we talked about how many beds there were, how many patients there were, how long they were going to be there, and how many doctors were required, and that sort of thing. All those are factors in capacity planning. And finally, make sure you read chapters 23 and 24. And as a reminder, this week, week 8, presentation you're going to put together, use a PowerPoint. If you want to, you can use Adobe. I think some people have used Adobe Spark, I think. That's fine too. But you're going to do a project similar to week 5 and 7, but you're not actually making a big paper out of it. Instead, you're going to do a presentation, one-on-one with me in Zoom. Pick a local company, make it a different company that you've picked than for weeks 5 and 7. Weeks 5 and 7 were the hard work to get you ready for week 8. Week 8 is just pick another company, a third company, do a presentation about it. It's a 10-minute presentation. So it doesn't have to be, over the top 30-minute, nothing like that. A few slides. Make sure you check out the assignment. There's a template that is in there. And then also underneath, I'll probably put underneath the materials for success for this week, I'm going to include a presentation that I did, a recording I did, so that you can kind of see how one might work. I'm also going to put out to you an email of some sort, that a clickable link where you can sign up for some time slots this coming week. Your paper has to be in by Sunday 11:59 p.m. to me. Your presentation must be done by Sunday evening 6 p.m. I'm not going to go after that because that's getting too late. 6 p.m. Sunday night is when you have to have your online presentation done with me by. And I'll provide you some slots. I'll be traveling some this week, but there'll be plenty of time for you to get some slots or to get some time in on that. Okay. Last week, go get him. Remember, God is on his throne. He's always been there. He always will be.